Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Jensen. I'm the Senior Economic Officer at the United States Embassy, and we're just thrilled that you could be here with us today. We're really grateful for your support and excited for the opportunity we've had. Yeah, please come over here where you can see, listen, try to find a seat where you can hear. The speakers are there for your advantage, but sit where you can, please. And I won't spend much time on this, but just to, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Brian Cotter from the American Chamber of Commerce and take it from here. So you've got your own.
Oh, it's a bit like Eurovision. I thought I was going to have to sing a song there for a moment, but I think I'm mic'd up so you can all hear me, and I'll turn around. Thanks very much, Brian, and it's great to be involved. The American Chamber is delighted in its participation at this economic conference, and I think at least my own experience this morning has been not only great ideas, but great engagement, and certainly over lunch there's been a lot of talk, and actually we're going to have a bit more talk here, but we're also going to be focusing on maybe identifying a few takeaways, particularly around the enablers and the barriers and challenges in this space of engagement. We have a member of the US Embassy Youth Council here somewhere. I don't know, hands up, who's taking the record? Are they in the room yet? No, but apparently they're going to take some notes, so there'll be some output from this in terms of record. I suppose when we're talking about the engagement process between industry and academic, I mean, there's many contact points, there's many end objectives in terms of the engagement that happens. And I suppose in many cases, a lot of the discussion is somewhat talking about the deinstitutionalization that we have in our minds about whether it's academic, industry, and sort of the coming together. You know, whether it's work, career, or life in one pillar, teaching and research in another pillar, economic, social, and political objectives in another. So our focus today is on the skills formation debate and the industry academic engagement there. Work and life has been part of that, the building economic capacity, but also global participation, whether that be in the technology world or indeed in the environmental, and just understanding what goes around us. We're going to discuss, and it will be a discussion, and I have a great panel I'll introduce to you who are going to lead that discussion, but I'll be encouraging everybody, or anyone we can fit in, to contribute as well. Not so much asking questions, but actually contributing to the debate, so questions will be welcome. So we'll be looking at the benefits arising from the engagement and the returns to the stakeholders that are involved, looking at the role of work itself in qualifying graduates in that concept, and also the process of the engagement. What have we learned about the challenges, and what are the key enablers to make it a success? So, and it's in that last point I think we want to spend a little bit of time and maybe come away with some takeaways in terms of the readout back to the economic conference. So we got a panel, as I said, that will lead some of that discussion. But prior to that, there is a commonality to the panel members, which is relevant to this session. In 2012, there was a study by the American Chamber of US industry and their skills needs, and it identified what is generally understood, and you've seen in other reports and confirmed, about particular skills gaps, and indeed the discussion about work readiness. But was also what it identified was, when we step back and look at the analysis, was the industry, whether it be multinational or domestic, that was export-led and orientated, and particularly technology, had matured in a certain manner. As the economy had changed over 10 to 15 years, it had naturally reorientated itself to take on higher value activities within its own value chain in the organizations. So when you looked at the skills gaps that existed by titles and profiles, there was always another word attached, and that was the word experience. That's because of the high level of activity and responsibility that needed to be taken on by individuals. And that presented another challenge, potentially, as more and more people were getting interested in STEM as a subject and taking a career in STEM. What would the absorptive capacity of industry here be in those circumstances when there was this work readiness gap, that experience gap? And therefore, how could we address that as an area that needed to be addressed? So it's improving the absorption capacity within industry, increasing the productivity, if I could use that term, of the HEI sector, in the sense of a greater percentage of graduates going through particularly the STEM programs were finding their first places of work here in Ireland. But also strategically, for the foreign direct investment pool in particular, how do we build skills pools that then would be attractive for further investment? Because that's what there's going to be. A lot of the investment is skills led. So the outcome of an engagement we had with the HEA, 7 or 8 US multinationals and a similar number of HEIs over a 6-month period was a proposal around a national, structured, accredited and postgraduate placement or internship program, almost like an apprenticeship model, which would have 3 pillars into it. It would be about personal development, which is that whole capacity of being at work and the skills of being at work in terms of teamwork, in terms of communications, organizational context, and understanding that organization and the industry that you're in, and particularly important in relation to the expert group on skills and the gaps and opportunities that they had identified, the practice specialization, which for us was identifiable areas in the STEM area. So 4 of our participants today in the panel have the experience of involving themselves in that process of industry academic engagement to come up with that program, which has been piloted now. It was just announced in the Action Plan for Jobs, where there's 25 companies and 9 HEIs looking to pilot this program of accredited workplace learning in a structured manner. I think that will draw some of the experience from that that we learnt there in this discusussion. In introduction to the panel, if I may be allowed, first of all, I'd like to welcome Tim Conlon. Tim is from the HEA. He looks after enterprise engagement at the HEA. He's had a number of posts with the organisation, including the National Research Council, the HEA Research and Infrastructure Programmes, and in their Policy and Planning Division. He's currently working on strategic instruments designed to improve ICT skills provision in the higher education sector, as well as labour market activation measures. I'd like to welcome Tony Donohoe on the far end here from Ibec. Tony Donohoe is the Head of Education, Social Innovation Policy at Ibec. He's a member of the National Economic and Social Council. He is the expert group on future skills needs, the Business Europe Social Affairs Committee, and the board of the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Training. And I know he's particularly been involved in that space with government recently over the last year. He's also served on the boards of the National Qualifications Authority of Ireland and the Equality Authority. Sitting next to me here is James Flynn of IBM. James Flynn is the University Programmes Manager at IBM Ireland. He's responsible for developing and managing the company's collaborative research and teaching programmes with universities and institutes of technology. The programmes focus on advancing science, technology, business in areas of mutual value and interest to his organisation and the universities. He's involved with IBM in a number of skills initiatives to promote STEM. Second over here beside Tony is a board member of the American Chamber. Mark Gantly is the Senior R&D Director in HP's cloud business globally. Also, he's the site leader and Managing Director for HP in Galway, a graduate of engineering at Trinity College Dublin. He also holds a diploma in business strategy from the IMI. He's joined the and of note, in particular, in 2003, he was appointed a Fellow of the Irish Academy of Engineering. And finally, but by no means least, is Irene Sheridan in the centre here of the Cork Institute of Technology. Irene has coordinated the Education and Employment and REAP Roadmap for Employment Academic Partnerships projects funded by the Higher Education Authority since 2007 at the Cork Institute of Technology. Both projects are at the interface between higher education and enterprise, and 13 Irish education institutions are directly involved in these collaborative projects. In 2011, she was appointed head of CIT Extended Campus, a unique facility which offers a signal point of contact and integrated contact management for any organisation seeking to interact with CIT, where to support the formation of work-ready graduates. I wonder, can you give them all a warm welcome? So to kick off our conversation on topic 1, as I indicated, the sort of benefits. What are the benefits of industry academic engagement for the formation of graduate skills? And maybe I'll ask Tim to kick off.
Thanks, Brian. So I suppose, thank you, James. So I suppose in the HE at the moment, we are in the process of implementing a new national strategy for higher education, which is kind of a change in the way that we do business in Ireland. And one of the parts of that strategy that I'm particularly looking at is that space of enterprise engagement. Because traditionally you would have educated students and sent them out into the world and to see what they would make of themselves. But more and more, as economies are changing, there is a need for graduates to be closer to the marketplace in terms of their skills, in terms of what they do. And we decided we would look at ways that we might do that better. And so we engaged in this project, the postgraduate program professional practice, with the American Chamber of Commerce and colleagues from the higher education sector to see how could we perhaps create a bridge for graduates moving from higher education into work and into useful work, so that they could be useful as employees and also, I suppose, better transition into the workplace. And we have been working on that project for about a year and a half. And I suppose you talked about some of the challenges that we've found in terms of there are lots of ideas from industry, for example, as to how higher education could do things better, and lots of ideas from higher education as to how industry could do things better. And when you roll out a project like this, you find that much and all, as we might talk about doing things fundamentally different or making these significant changes to how we do business, that sometimes you run up against the accountants, no offence to any of the accountants in the room, and people like that, so that changing systems is actually not that easy. So I think what I would say in terms of the process to date and where we've came from and where we've got to is that the most useful part of what we've done has been that discussion and actually getting people together to look at what the challenges are and the shared challenges. And I really believe that when people work in that space, and if you make the space in industry and if you make the space in higher education, people to work together and have those discussions, you get an understanding. And we see that in programs such as the ICT Skills Conversion Programme and through Springboard, whereas each year of those programs roll out and each iteration of the programs, you see changes. So, for example, I'm looking at 481 Springboard applications at the moment, and the level of industry engagement in that programme in its third year is really amazing. It is significant, the level to which industry has engaged with higher education to look at some of the labour market challenges we have in Ireland. I mean, bear in mind, only 5 years ago, pretty much 20% of our economy disappeared overnight. All those jobs just went. And there are people who were in college at the time training for a different economy that isn't there now. And we need to look at ways that we can work with enterprise to give those people opportunities to work in a different economy. And as I say, Springboard, just looking at it, it's really been very successful in that way, and that industry has really engaged. We look at, I suppose, the outcomes from the first 2 years of that programme, and those programmes where industry were involved from the get-go in terms of the programme content, in terms of the work placement opportunities and so on, are the ones that have the greatest success in terms of outcomes for the participants. So we talk about higher education, we talk about industry, and I think we should talk about the students as well too, and what their experience should be. And so this postgraduate programme in professional practice is just another one of these kind of models that we're trying to see how we can, I suppose, better equip students for their futures, for their work lives, and also, I suppose, help industry address some of the challenges they have, and help our education to work with industry to understand their challenges.
Thanks, Tim. James, I mean, you're involved in many programs for a period of time, wide experience of the corporate interface at least. What are the benefits, from an IBM perspective, of engaging in that kind of exercise?
Okay, well, thanks, Brian. First, I would just make the point, and I suppose Tim was talking about there, in recent years there's been a significant change in the level and quality of industry academic engagement. I think it took quite a few years to get going, but I think it's been prompted in recent years by funding from the government in terms of the research initiatives, SFI, PRTLI, and also a growing realisation among business and community and the academic community that colleges have a central role to play in terms of providing, in terms of benefits. There would be the high level of skills, and certainly in our own company, we've really increased the level of skills significantly over the last 10 years or so. Also, research centres, and again, a company I work with, IBM, has been very involved in research activities in recent years and collaboration with universities, and also providing a culture of innovation, which we talked about earlier. So if we look at the marketplace now, there are a lot of opportunities for growing sector, rapidly growing sectors of the economy, but the requirements from industry are changing. There's need for cross-disciplinary skills, work experience that was talked about this morning, but also, and this relates particularly to the postgraduate internship program, specific skills in certain areas. And an example of that would be, say, security, which I was talking to the manager yesterday in terms of who runs ethical hacking group in the software lab, and he was saying, it's fine. He interviews students, for positions over the last number of years. Having a degree or master's degree in forensic computing is all very important, but he said they really need to demonstrate an interest in the area of security. So, for instance, he goes to colleges encouraging students to get involved in open communities, such as there's various communities that deal with ethical hacking and so on, like honey.net and IRIS and things like that. It's really to contribute to those programs so that you can demonstrate that you have an interest, so that when you're ready to take up a position, you're ready to start straight away. I suppose in terms of examples, if we look at some of the research programs that we're involved in with SFI in the software lab and in the research group, there's about 1,500 people working there, and in the last number of years we've engaged with colleges in a number of research programs around energy and environment management, marine research, artificial intelligence, and so on. And in all these cases, we're linked in with universities and colleges in terms of working with students, providing them access to expertise, to working on joint papers, joint projects, and also giving them valuable work experience where they can gain skills in these particular areas that they're working in. So when they finish their research, they have a better idea in terms of what the world of they have an insight into the world of work, and also what opportunities there are for them, whether it's in this industry or another industry where some of these skills are obviously sought after. At a undergraduate level, earlier we talked about participative learning with Brian McRae in DCU. So an example of that I just thought is one we're actually working with DCU on. It's in third year computing we have an IT architectural module where for over 2 weeks a number of architects from IBM come in and give lectures. At the end of the 2 weeks then there's a case study where they work for over 2 days in groups of 5. And the idea of it's not company or technology specific. It's more just to explain to people in computer science a business application in terms of IT architecture, what the role of an IT architect is, and giving them kind of a broader sense of opportunities in that space. So the case study that we're working on at the moment, the last few years, is the traffic congestion charging in London and how you set that up. So, I mean, this is where you have, it doesn't just happen overnight, obviously. There's engagement between faculty, students and experts within the company who give up their time to do this. And I suppose an important point of all this is that it took quite a bit of persuasion to actually get this on the course module in DCU. So that's one of the things I would suggest is that that they're probably in terms, we could probably talk about this later, but in terms of enablers and so on, that's a key part of it. But I think it all boils down to having a constant exchange of ideas between academia and industry.
Irene, from the context of your own work, more broadly than CIT, your REAP research in particular has had a perspective about the evolution of thinking within the higher level institutions about engagement. Has there been a change of mindset in terms of the benefits that is seen there, and how is that recognised? This is expensive. If we look at the projects that we were involved in, I'm going to hazard a guess that people on it spent, on average, and I know you're smiling because you did more than some, 7 to 12 days, I would say, manpower. So to get it right, it takes time.
It absolutely does take time. But Brian, in response to your question, I think it is very clear that there are benefits for all of the actors if this is structured and supported and integrated. So there are very clear benefits for the students. And when I say students, I really mean everybody who's learning at every stage of their lives, not just the people who've come in from school into higher education, but those who need to return to higher education or those who need to continue with higher education while they're in the workplace. So there are certainly benefits for the students. And the benefits for the students are really centred in shorthand around the relevance and currency of what they're learning. So if higher education is working closely with enterprise, with industry, with all of the employment positions that those people might get to, then the relevance and currency of what the people are learning is supported by that interaction. There are benefits for the employers. There are benefits in terms of the work readiness, the employability, I suppose the attitudinal changes that there are within the learners if they're supported in that way. And there are significant benefits for higher education. There are benefits for higher education for the staff, for the institutions, in terms of those partnership arrangements. But there are, and there should be, benefits for society. And if we look at it in terms of the benefits for society, I heard before lunch, at the session before the lunch break, and it nearly put me off my lunch, but not quite, it would take something more. I heard that actually this was not really the job of businesses, that higher education institutions need to output people who are ready for employment. And that really it wasn't the job of businesses, it's, he said, to turn out people who are to educate our people. So businesses are not responsible for educating our people. And if you take that sentence and you think about it, then that actually was true in a world where you could take a person from school, put them into an educational process, whatever that process was, if it was an apprenticeship process, a further education process, or a higher education process, support them through a process for a couple of years, and then they could expect to leave and have a job for 40 years in that sector. That was certainly true then. Then it was the job of education to turn out people who were ready for specific roles. But at the same session, I heard somebody from the American Chamber, and again, the names now, I'd have to go through my book to find it, but I heard somebody from the American Chamber tell us about 3 jobs that were on the American Chamber's website. Do you remember them? Can anyone recall them? The jobs had all more than 8 to 10 syllables in their description. I don't remember the words. Sorry? One was for Finland. Okay. So if you look at the role of higher education in this, right, how a parent or a learner or even an educationalist, actually, remember the people who are in your higher education institutions are 25 years away from their own graduation age. You know, they've been there and they've been working away. So you should be hoping that they're interacting closely with industry and with enterprise. Otherwise, what they're teaching you or your kids or your neighbours, you know, is well out of date. So if you look at it and you think about if the job specifications are 8 to 10 syllables long and include, what kind of competencies include ethical awareness, communication skills, multiple languages, ability to interact with people and design, develop and, manipulate mathematics at a very high level using Ruby on Rails, then, I'm not sure which higher education institution will do it unless they're working very closely with a whole range of people.
Mark, I've been very impressed, having visited your facility a number of times on this whole area of benefits. I think your organisation in particular has seen the benefits not only to the graduates, but you've learned a lot in your own organisation as well. It's successful programmes in ICT conversion and Jobs Bridge, among others.
Absolutely. I guess, Brian, software is actually not the worst problem, because what you find with students in college is that the technology is quite accessible and quite cheap. So we get graduates coming to us actually quite ready in a lot of cases because they've experience of actually building substantial systems. The example I always use, the counterexample is if you've done civil engineering, you haven't built a small bridge at college, right? But you may have built a substantial software system. And more of our students come to us with pointers to code they've written. So they're participating in open source projects. So software is actually not the worst problem, right? If you take manufacturing, and just to look at Galway specifically, economically, Galway is 70,000 people. And there's about 9,000 people employed in medical device manufacturing. So medical devices is the engine of the Galway economy. It's what employs the mainstream population. And I don't think within the colleges we would naturally have people who would act as role models for graduates to go into manufacturing. So what you find is that, particularly at postgraduate, the role models are actually academics, career academics. And when you ask master's students, PhD students, what would they like to be? They want to be academics, right? So it's very important industry actually present role models to the students for the manufacturing business, because there's no question that industry won't survive if it doesn't move forward. So we need the brightest and the best actually working on productivity, on the next generation of products, etc. So from an economic point of view, it's very, very important to get the industry people in front of the students to act as role models.
Very good. To move the conversation along, Tony, if we look at the second topic that we wanted to talk about before we bring in some people, the whole area of work experience, placement, postgraduate internships, apprenticeship, as an education process, how important is this to the qualifying of the graduate, if you like, for today's careers?
Well, I definitely won't say unimportant. It is very important. I think it loosely can be captured under the phrase employability, which makes it sound at first sight quite limiting, but there's actually a lot in that phrase. There's various definitions around it, but they usually centre around a collection of knowledge, skills and attributes. And if you mine down into what we mean under those headings, and incidentally that's a big challenge, and hopefully we will get a chance to look at the barriers, but translating the sort of the jargon around this into something that's meaningful within an institution is quite challenging. But the knowledge first piece, I mean, Irene mentioned the relevance of gaining relevant skills, but it also should be borne in mind that workplaces themselves now are producers of knowledge. And, you know, you look at what happens in James or Mark's organisations, they are actually producing knowledge there. There's a long history of experiential learning as well, which gives you another insight into knowledge. Then skills, again, they can range from relevant occupation and technical skills, but then into the infamous soft skills, which are actually very hard. And that's the sort of generic skills that I am sick and tired reciting at this stage. And maybe it's something, again, we could discuss how we make sense of this long list of competencies that business is in a habit of trotting out. But they are, even that doesn't capture it. I mean, the communication, the team working, the critical thinking, the analytical skills, etc. There's also learning around negotiating around organisations, and a lot of quite complex skills you can only gain if you're actually in an organisation, in a company or an external organisation. The third element of this employability definition is around attributes, and again that can be quite subjective, and there is always a debate about how early you develop them. And it's also terribly relevant to the current debate around the junior cycle, for example. Those attributes, and they're pretty much the same as that we look for in third level, and again in the workplace, they're inculcated at a fairly early age, and that's why it's a pity that the junior cycle reform has kind of got enmeshed in this industrial relations debate. Why is that important for the graduate? Well, basically, they are most likely to go into a world of multiple careers, and you have to bear in mind that the graduates of today will still be in the workplace for until at least 2070, and probably beyond. We can't think of or begin to imagine the type of world that they're going to be working in. Again, James mentioned his, ethical hacking division. Now, who would have come up with a job title of ethical hacking even 3 or 4 years ago? So there are these range of occupations that people will need to keep reinventing themselves, and therefore the attributes such as resilience, because another certainty of this brave new world is short-term contracts, multiple contracts, relatively little tenure of employment. So resilience and flexibility are going to become important attributes, and they can actually be developed even up to third level. I remember being at a similar event to this in Trinity, and there was the professor of psychology was on the platform, and I posited the idea, well, look, all this stuff we talk about, really that you're either born with it or you develop it very early. He made the point that the formation of the young person's brain actually continues right up into their early 20s, and the decisions or the attributes around entrepreneurship, etc., that we look for can be developed to a relatively late age.
Very good. At this point, I'd encourage some input from the floor, indeed, if anyone had any observations to make. I know you have a very diverse but very experienced attendee list here today in terms of their engagement with third level. Any input from the floor? Way back there. Do we have a mic? A second mic? I thought we had a second.
I'm unfortunate I got that answer, Irene, at the end of the session. I didn't really need to see the sound so forceful, but I think, as many people said, a community educates a child, and we're working at that critical age of 11 to 13-year-old. Leading those soft skills, Tony, that you mentioned, which are leadership qualities, they're not on the curriculum. So it's up to initiatives like Biz World to bring it in, and we do so very well. But we work with business people, and it's just a partnership that really I think is very important, that we offer businesses a role as the dragon in the den, as a mentor through our workshops, 11-hour programs. And I really was expecting industry to do it all, because that's our USP. Our USP is we're a unique combination of educators and business people. So it's great to see people, back us up here today. So thank you very much. And I really think there's an adopt-to-school opportunity at that critical age of 4th, 5th and 6th class to start building relationships with children before they hit that system which we're all looking at about today. Primary schools are much more open, and those buildings are very open to more creativity in education, and we have to start there. And I think the ideal partners are the industry in Ireland.
Thank you. Anyone else on that topic, please? Over here.
My name is Laura Dennehy. Thank you. I'm country manager for an organisation called Enactus Ireland, and this conversation is really interesting for me because I sort of see us as bridging a gap between industry and HEIs. And there's so many points that have been raised that have been really, really interesting. One of the things we talk about in Enactus, we work with students in third level. We engage with them to develop social enterprises. And through that process, we enable students to develop these work-ready skills. We partner with business to do this. We're funded purely from the corporate sector. And I think in looking at the benefits for industry and HEIs, there are so many benefits. And sometimes these benefits aren't really recognised. One of the ones that hasn't been highlighted here is the learning that staff have within businesses when they work with students and HEIs. We see it as a really strong employee development opportunity for business people to have the opportunity to work with innovative and creative students. Also, I think it's really exciting to think about educating students not just for their first job, but for their whole careers. And all the skills that Tony spoke about are so necessary for, and not even just in the workplace, but to enable students at all ages to deal with every aspect of their life within their careers and outside.
Thanks very much. Tim, on this topic of the qualifying of the graduate, what's the HEA perspective, at least in terms of how that's been recognised? We've talked about accredited learning at work. Are there, beyond the pilot that's going to happen this summer, are there other good examples, and what's the thinking around that?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier on this national strategy process, and that creates a framework in which we're looking at this enterprise engagement, and it's as James mentioned, and indeed Laura just now, and if you look at the report that Louise Phelan launched this morning, talking about, I suppose, you've mapped that space where industry is engaging with society and is engaging with education, and there's a huge map over there on that side. You can see where it's happening, and we're mapping now on the higher education side where we engage. And as James said earlier on, we're in a new space in education now where we're very interested in this and looking at those crossovers. We're starting to map that activity, and there is so much going on that you really wouldn't be aware of. We've just been through, as I said, the national strategy process where we've met all the higher education institutions. We've asked them, what are you doing in this space, and in particular, one of the challenges at the moment is jobs, of course. So I don't want to sort of bang on about that only, because there's a broader reason, there are broader issues of skills and broader issues of employability. But right now, one of the major crises in Ireland is the jobs crisis, and that's why we're not too ashamed to say that we're very much in the HA interested in that and looking at what we can do better in higher education to address that. It's not always going to be all about that, but at the moment, that's one of the prime drivers of our strategy in the space, to look at how can we better get people, I suppose, out of unemployment back into work, and also how can we better have people leaving college going into work. I mean, the data we have shows us that if you have a higher education, you're twice as likely to be in a job as not to have. But at the same time, there's a significant cohort of the 396,000 who are currently unemployed, who come from a higher education background, who educated for a different economy. So, as I say, that's kind of where we're at the moment. So, I think in thinking about employability, and in particular the PGPP, the postgraduate program professional practice, we're conscious that if we create this environment where higher education can work with industry to qualify people within an industry environment, they're better trained, better able for work. It's a bit like the Harvard model, where if you give them the chance, maybe they'll create a job for themselves. This is the idea that's behind it. And so it's back to the pools you mentioned at the beginning. If we put this effort behind this, and if these interns go into a place in work, into your organisations, many of you here, I hope, I recognise faces who've helped us with this project so far, that it will help you to see that there is a resource available to you. And I met with SAS yesterday, and interesting that when they talk about the work they do, they say that, every evening, 96% of their company value walks out the door, and they want them coming back in the next morning. So it's about people who are prepared to work in that environment, and your people are the most important thing. So we're hoping that we can work to create this new cohort of people that might help organisations to expand, to bring new projects onshore into Ireland. And so, as I say, it's a contribution to upskilling people and making them more work ready within the workplace, but also an opportunity, as I say, to maybe expand and address some of that jobs crisis issue that we're facing at the moment.
Mark, can I take up that theme with you specifically around, you can look at the various reports, particularly if you look at the great work been done by the expert group in plotting, the graduates that are coming through. There's a story there that you can have a sense of it. You're working with education institutes locally, or indeed in the disciplines that you have. So, and then the next layer is you actually have engagement with students through various programs. Having sight of, if we want to call it, work ready in your definition, graduates, how does that help win investment?
It's quite simple. We're not opportunity constrained, more or less. So I don't have a struggle in terms of seeing future opportunity for growth in the business we're in. I think we can continue to attract more jobs. Right? I think our US parents are very comfortable with investing in Ireland. That applies not just to HP, but across the sector, the FDI sector. So there's definitely opportunity. So my concern is actually executing. Right? And it's this paradox where we've got 390,000 people on the live register, but still a shortage of people with the relevant skills. And I know we and other peer companies are looking beyond these shores to fill that gap. So it's a perverse situation. So a critical part of the internship program is that it actually positions talent. So I feel far more comfortable bidding for new business if I know I've got a pipeline of talent coming through. Right? And this is nothing new. All the established professions, medicine, law, accountancy, etc., have had this forever. Right? So the idea of having a STEM internship is perfectly natural. But the critical thing for us is it's about timing. That if we bid for opportunity, we know we've got a pipeline of talent coming through that we can execute on. Because if we fail, the opportunity goes elsewhere now and in the future.
I'm going to be very unkind, actually, and maybe ask to bring Julie Spillane in here, because her and a number of technology companies, plus the process we went through, opened our minds about this STEM skills, and to change the language to be basically industries based on STEM, because that's a whole wider set of skills. And Julie, I know you've been doing a lot of work with industry and engagement with education to get that different view and understanding. Any observations from your perspective in terms of what we can do here from an industry engagement perspective?
Very unkind indeed.
I know, it's a little unfair, but it came to mind though because we were talking so much about STEM.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting for me to hear this discussion, the discussions earlier today as well. So maybe just to give you the background. So a group of companies have gotten together who are multinational technology companies, but actually not doing technology development within Ireland. So Louise, you saw on the stage earlier, Sharon McCooey is here today from LinkedIn as well. It's Facebook, Microsoft, Accenture, IBM. Rosemary is here beside me as well. And we've gotten together really because what we're doing is not technology, but actually we're all working in a technology environment. And actually what we're doing is effectively helping the companies to operate. So brilliant for me, the nod that Paddy Cosgrove gave to this morning as well, is it's almost easy to set up a company, but actually to scale a company is incredibly difficult. So all those operation skills are incredibly important. So for me, I think what we're developing is this terminology around, it's sort of this fusion in a way. It's a technology environment, so a lot of the STEM subjects, but actually a lot of the people who work in our industry, and we employ 40% of the multinational technology companies, are actually non-technologists. So it's this fusion between almost traditional career paths, but actually in a totally different way because it's a technology environment. So the technology provides the disruption, and almost our industry helps to bring about the new business models. So as a definition for everything you've said, industry engagement is incredibly important because your point earlier was, if industry is not involved, then, because a lot of us would say, we will be doing jobs in 5 years' time that have not been invented right now. So I think this education in industry piece is incredibly important. One thing that was interesting for me this morning, because I know the American Chamber research, it is mind-blowing the amount of work that Enterprise is doing in education. But Brian McCrath said it very, very succinctly this morning, the impact is completely under-realised because it's not done in a coordinated way. And I think as part of the ICT skills plan, Smart Futures is going to help with some of that, but it doesn't feel like to me it's all encompassing. We're talking here about obviously the internships. We're talking about industry going into classrooms. We're talking a lot of conversation this morning about parents as well. How do you educate parents to help influence their kids into subjects and careers they don't actually understand? That's a very difficult thing as a parent to do. So, I think it seems all encompassing here, and it's great to see the parts of things that have been happening. But I would wonder though, we often talk about what are the 1, 2 or 3 things that maybe the educators would ask from industry that we could be doing, because we're all doing lots of stuff that you think would really push the dial forward. And I know, Tim, you're trying to gather quite a lot of that, but I'm very interested. If there's 1 or 2 things that you think we could do, what would it be?
And before we take that, because we'll roll that into the next section on the enablers and the barriers maybe, but that was one of the reasons that the American Chamber conducted that analysis of the social impact, was the desire to have a discussion about the diversity of that program. So how were they, and could we then have a conversation about, can we consolidate some of that? So I think there is definitely an area there to be developed. Oh, pardon me.
Lynn Scarf from the Science Scholar in Trinity, and one of the aspects that's striking me about a number of the conversations that I've heard this morning is an aspirational aspect, right? So we're all in this room right now and we all have somewhat of an understanding of the kind of careers and skill sets that we're talking about. But yet if you think about those students that are perusing all of those amazing courses on Springboard, or young undergraduate students, they are aspiring towards careers that they potentially don't know what they are, what they mean in real terms, right? So there's a huge opportunity there in terms of bringing that art, science, creative aspect that we've all talked about, and how, from Science Gallery's point of view, we're very interested in being the space that brings people that have different skill sets and different ideas together and showing them, where they can go with that. And I think that there is a need for, at a very basic level, showing people a day in the life of what it looks like to be in IBM, or a day in the life of what it looks like to be in HP, and actually, that there's coding, but there's also problem solving and so on. So there also seems to be a part of the puzzle there. You think about young students and they're watching TED videos, and the aspirational aspect of watching something like that, and how powerful that can be, and how could you harness that kind of energy, but feed it into the opportunities that exist through industries like this, and through kind of organisations that are trying to facilitate this whole process. So I wonder, is there something around that space?
Thanks, Lynn. And Colleen wants to get in here very quickly. Colleen.
Just very quickly, and it touches on something Malcolm Byrne said earlier as well about youth's involvement in this process, and having interviewed somebody for Social Entrepreneurship Award recently who entered an engineering course, dropped out largely because everything that was in the public domain didn't tell her what the course was about. I think as part of the graduate internship, it might be really interesting to include a peer-to-peer evaluation method. So some people who have gone through as interns, their experience, to feed that back, because we're all getting long in the tooth, and us saying about potential jobs or experiences, if they can hear it from their peers, and I think that might be a really valuable thing, the voices of those interns back into the sector themselves. It's just
That's perfect timing for the input, because actually we're looking to pull that into our own programme, some aspects of that in the assessment. We've about 10 minutes left. I want to just kind of look at the barriers and enablers, and I'm kind of going to go to a few of the panel here, but I'm sure there's further contributions, and we have also got Julie's question, which I guess is to Tim and to Irene, around the top 3 things they want to ask. But first of all, the sort of the enablers and the barriers to engagement. Irene, you've got some perspective on this, both from the current programme we've worked on, but broader.
Yeah, even in a broader basis than that. Look, ultimately we've said, I mean, we've agreed there are huge benefits to everybody involved in getting this, engagement embedded throughout our institutions, throughout our organisations, and harvesting value from that. But, the reality is that it's not easy. And it's not easy has been illustrated both by this postgraduate certificate programme and the difficulty that has come even in designing it and then in taking the steps towards it. But actually, it's not easy, and that's something that we've looked at throughout many years through the REAP project that's been funded through the HEA, so looking at those roadmaps for employment academic engagement. In the process, I mean, Tony talked about the learning that's generated, or the knowledge that's generated within the workplace. And from a higher education perspective, this programme and many other programmes are looking at that as in terms of the value and the validity and the authenticity of learning that's generated outside of the 4 walls of higher education. And that's something I think that we all agree. We all know that when a graduate graduates and they walk out and we shake their hand and it's wonderful to see them go, and in 4 years' time they're a completely different person. And they're a completely different person because of their experiences within the workplace. And that is learning. But for higher education, it hasn't been easy for us to turn around and to recognise that in the context of higher education credit. That sort of protected notion of learning, that it happens when you sit in front of me and I tell you something. And because I've told you that thing, I know you know it. I'll come back and I'll check, but because you were sitting in my class, I know you know it. And the difficulty for higher education has been in actually recognising that not alone can people seek out or can knowledge be generated within other settings, but that knowledge can be validated within the higher education structure. And I know that's quite complex, but it has actually raised significant challenges. But having said that, this is not new. This is actually being done. There are absolutely amazingly innovative examples of this kind of work-based or experiential learning being integrated into higher education programmes throughout the country. And that's something that under the Strategic Innovation Fund projects, one of the things we did was try to uncover those examples of brilliance. And those examples of brilliance, the only problem with them is that they're isolated. And that they're not throughout the whole system, but that's okay, that'll just take time. If the idea is good enough, if the practice is good enough, then for us, I think in terms of higher education reform, what we're seeking to do is make that good practice common practice by actually just uncovering it, by making it evident how good it is. So one of the barriers to this happening is that concept that learning actually happens within workplace domains, within life domains and other domains, and that quite often people are happy to say it does happen, but it kind of happens at level 6. And I don't know if those of you are familiar with the framework, but that would be, the skills kind of awards. We're all kind of happy that you can pick up skills that maybe you wouldn't get in the classroom. But level 9, level 10, master's, doctoral level learning happening outside of our universities, outside of our hallowed halls, I don't think so.
And what about then key enabler? What would be a...
The real enabler is building that mutual understanding. Honestly, it is. But somebody asked and about 3 things that would support this happening. And the real enabler is that, and for us in the REAP project, we did a very early piece of work in 2008, 2009 around partnerships and what makes those partnerships happen. And essentially we found that it distilled down to 3 things. There were relationships that were created. There were resources that were committed on both sides of the partnership. And there were realistic expectations of what could come out of it. So I think you can't do anything without that. If you want to know what we really need from Enterprise, we really need you to continue to give us work placement opportunities, internships for all students, not just the first 10%. We really need you to give us those opportunities, to continue to give us, to support it, to understand that it's not working, it's learning. And it's learning in a supported context. We really need you to continue to recruit graduates. Not people with multiple years of experience and many, many different skill sets. Recruit graduates as well in some mixed model that works for your business. And we really need you to enter those partnerships in the longer term. Things that work quickly for you are unlikely, honestly, to come out of higher education. The reality is that it's probably a 5-year window that you're committing resources into working with your local higher education institution. But honestly, the benefits are beyond 50 years.
Very good. Tony, from a business perspective, at least from an industry perspective, a key barrier, and maybe a little bit more on enablers, since we want to focus on some positive things we can do.
Yeah, okay, I'll take one fairly broad barrier and a smaller one. The broad one, I think for most higher education institutions, this is still a minority sport. And I was struck by what Julie said about the amount of non-STEM graduates who are actually employed in the STEM sector.
It's phenomenal, isn't it?
And despite, well, it is at one level, it isn't at another. When you look at the intake into our higher education institutions, the vast majority of people go in to do arts, humanities and social sciences. They attract the best, amongst the best people, So it's probably not totally surprising. And there's a very important constituency, are the academics in those departments who are still stuck on the page of seeing us as barbarians at the gate and have got a different view of what they do and of what higher education institutions do. Now, obviously, some institutes of technology get this. Some universities, which badge themselves as universities of enterprise, get this. Some more vocationally orientated engineering, etc., springs to mind, get this. But there's a lot of other people in the higher education system. I think this is an intellectual argument because anybody who's worked with higher education knows that within the institutions, there may not be a whole load of managerial autonomy, but each department and school marches to the beat of its own drum, and it's a case of winning that argument with academics that actually have a different view.
And key to the enablement, sort of what would make a difference?
What would make a difference? I think there's winning that argument, or at least couching it. I think you've got to be upfront about academic institutions and business exist for totally different purposes. They've got different cultures, quite rightly. It's not saying one's right, one's wrong. And you've got to look at the intersection on the Venn diagram, where there's shared interests, shared opportunities. And I think couching these sort of discussions in a language that is not inimical to traditional academic values is very important. Also, as a sidebar on this, we're talking a lot about internships, work placements, etc. The model is that the student is registered and then goes out into business. I think we should look at flipping that as well. I was involved, and you alluded to it, in the apprenticeship review group. I think that has some tremendous opportunities to embed this, because it breaks that old mould of apprenticeships which we've always associated with the 25 predominantly construction, craft type occupations, and posits the notion and the opportunities for advanced apprenticeships right up to level 10. And this would be where the company recruits the apprentice or professional trainee, however you brand them, and there is that earn and learn model. And as university and IoT fees increase, it might become increasingly attractive to people.
James, as the barbarian, or one of the barbarians on the panel at least, in terms of the barriers, if I might ask you a direct question, which occurs to me, particularly in a business context, what is the issue around the management of headcount in particular, and how that's perceived and managed as a metric, and how does that, is there something we can do there in enabling to get around that? Because it's a significant issue that's not understood in the way companies plan and manage, and you probably have to do a lot of work around that space as well, particularly when you're doing these engagement programs.
Yeah. Well, I think working with colleges and universities for a number of years, I don't think I've survived so far, so I don't think they see me exactly as a barbarian. But yes, there is an issue for businesses because, and within companies you have separate business units, and they all have different hiring cycles, and this is a constant problem. Sometimes, American multinationals tend to have fall plans where they plan in October, November for the following year, and that doesn't exactly coincide with the academic calendar, which begins in September. So we're, I suppose, we're talking within, the business units about, obviously trying to plan ahead and get around some of the systems that they have to do, that's to work with the universities. And I think, over the last few years we've been managing to do that. I suppose as well, another issue is that if you're looking at planning, and we have to be careful about planning certain courses. If some organizations are talking about specific skills that they want a course set up for, but if in 2 or 3 years' time the landscape, the business cycle could be completely different. So again, that's you need to be looking after the students as well there, that you're not getting them into too narrow an area, and you can't promise 2 or 3 years' time what's going to happen in terms of graduate intake. I think it's just a question of trying to plan and take on a certain number of graduates in a fairly general area, and work with have a good interaction with the universities. And I think the Venn diagram idea that Tony mentioned is very apt, because often it's trying to reach the people who have the interest on both sides, and getting facilitating that exchange of priorities and capabilities. They're the two main issues.
Very good. Brian Jensen, are we on time, or do we have to wrap up now, or do we have a few more minutes? We have to wrap up now. Well, I'd rather, indeed, if one or two people wanted to just get in maybe very quickly with a few quick remarks on that, enablers and barriers. Mike?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. Maybe, I think the first thing to say is that things that people are doing, and particularly what that lady is doing over there with the social enterprise, all those things that we're doing, we should keep doing, because it's very important that we do that, and it's very important that we find ways of causing this to happen. But I think the biggest barrier that we have all the time is the fact that we think about unemployment as a social issue, and it's not a social issue, it's a strategic issue. And until such time as we start dealing with the fact that our biggest resource is people, and all of the people that can contribute, and get all the people to contribute, then we don't fix the problem. And if you look at the gross value add per person across the country in different places, you can see the massive spread that we have, and you can see how that contribution is not significant in certain areas, and they're the areas where we have high levels of unemployment, and we have to cause something to happen. So I think at a very strategic level, we need to think about the employment as strategic, but also unemployment as a strategic issue. And on the example that we talked about the STEM program, that the postgraduate program, I think the biggest help that we got there was actually from Joan and Dan in the Department of Social Protection and Social, because the issue we always have isn't coming up with a solution, it's getting the solution to work. And that's what, using JobBridge as the mechanism here to cause this thing to work was the secret that caused the thing to be productive for people. And I think that's a part of the equation, is getting it to work is what we have to work on. But the idea is we should keep experimenting with them and playing with them, because I think it's all positive and will work.
Yeah, I must thank everyone. I suppose, there's a theme. The modalities of any of this is very important, and also the communications. I mean, we could have talked quite a bit about, what do we mean by internship and placement and how they all fit in, because they all have different stepping stones along that. We don't have any more time, unfortunately, to stay on track to continue this, but I want to thank the panellists, but also those who contributed from the floor. And Julie, I know you're put on the spot, so thank you as well. And I hope you found it interesting. There is a readout, I believe, going to take place that has been recorded by one of the Embassy's Youth Council members, and I suppose this is just one of many of a pattern of dialogues between stakeholders that will advance a kind of a united thinking around this, and I hope you all found it useful. Would you join with me and to thank our panel very much? Thank you.